All right, welcome to another edition of How to Fix It Yourself. This is Dave and Dave working on this. So today we're going to be working on an Expedition 2015 with an EcoBoost engine. And it turns out that that's an important piece of information when working on the Expedition as to whether it's an EcoBoost or not. Things are a little different on the EcoBoost. Just as a upfront piece of information, the EcoBoost uses direct injection fuel injectors. So it injects the fuel directly into the cylinder, where most cars that have, quote, fuel injection, they're injecting it into the intake manifold and letting the air carry the fuel air mixture into the cylinder. So they have some issues that make it really good, but also some issues that make it kind of a real pain in the neck. So a couple of weeks ago, it tossed a P219A code, which is kind of a real nebulous code. It just says that there's an air-fuel imbalance, and this particular code is for bank 1, which is the passenger side. So it's a little hard to know what is really going on. There's some kind of an imbalance, and the question is, what causes the imbalance? So we're going to start with things that are fairly simple to do. Most people at home can do these, but ultimately it may involve replacing some fuel injectors. So this episode, we're going to do some of the more simple things. If we come back for part 2, it'll be doing the fuel injectors themselves. So we're going to replace the upstream O2 sensor on the passenger side on bank 1, which is a common cause of throwing this code. And we're also going to replace all the spark plugs because they seem to be fouled. And that could be caused by the O2 sensor, it could be caused by the fuel injectors, it's just a lot of things. But at least if we get that much done and drive it for a while, then if it retosses the code, then we know we've got an issue with the fuel injectors. So let's go ahead and get at it, and we'll do these the O2 sensor first, and then we'll come back and do the spark plugs, and then at least you'll have that to go with. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, even though we're going to work on the fuel injector, is we're going to pull the shroud off of the top of the engine. It just pops right off. It's not a big deal. The only thing you have to do is just remove the oil cap, which sits right here. So you pull that cap off, pop this up, put the cap back on, and it's good to go. Now, there is a couple of latches, mechanisms that you have to be sure you hook in. They're way back at the very back of the engine, right there. So when you put this back in, you want to be sure you hook that in. And when you pop it up, just be where you need to rock it up a little bit in order to pop it out of those hooks. Then the last thing we're going to do while we're in the engine, just because it needs to get done, is we're going to go ahead and just pull this piece of foam, which protects the last spark plug and kind of help insulate some of the injector mechanisms that go to the fuel rails. And so this is just a protective device, so we're just going to pop that off of there, and then that'll be out of the way. So from here, we're going to start working on the O2 sensor. So bank 1 is on the passenger side, and it's back up in here. Now, we might be able to get it by going in past the mud guard here. You can see it when you look at it, but the easiest thing to be is going to be to pull the tire. So we're going to go ahead and pull the tire, and that way we can get at it. We'll see if we can actually get at everything through there. Otherwise, we'll have to pick up the car a little further to be able to get it from underneath. So we'll give it a shot both ways and see what works easiest. So we're going to jack up the car. I've already got the lug nuts kind of loose, so it'll make the tire easy to come off. So we'll now jack up the car and put it on a stand, and a jack stand, and we'll see how it goes from there. All right, so the next thing that has to happen is we've got to take this cover plate off. It's a piece of, looks like some kind of a fiber material. So now that it's all loose, we'll just take this out. That drops it down. Got to be sure we recover our bolt. And then now we have access to the exhaust system right here, with the one we're going to replace being up under there. And we'll look at that in just a few minutes. So this was clipped using a zip tie, which you can see right there that it had a zip tie, and that was wrapped around these two, let's see, let me try to get light there, on these two guys right here. So we had to clip the zip tie in order to get it down. Then you'll notice we cut the wires so that we had enough room to pull this down and try and get at the connector. But as you can see, get the light on it, but as you can see, the connector is still, my hand's wedged way in there to try and get to that connector. So it's going to be a real pain to try and be able to work on that connector and to be able to separate the two pieces. Now you've got a clip on the top here that's got to come undone, and you've got a pull tab on the back, right, if I can get to it, right there by my thumb, that has to be pulled out as well in order to get that to separate. So you're going to be working in very tight spaces. It's going to be a pain. You're going to have to use some long pliers, some long clips in order to get this all done. But, you know, eventually, if you're just patient and work slowly at it, you can do it without, you know, breaking anything. So that's what you're up against. And this is the part that went in there. You can, oops, turn it around here. So you can see the little tab on the top there, where that was clipped on the top there. So that'll kind of give you an idea of what you're up against when you're trying to deal with the wires and get this wiring all put together again and taken apart. So good luck with that. You can do it. It'll work real well for you. Just be patient and make sure you have some tools that have some long handles to them. So we've gone through how to take the wire harness off and the connectors and the issues relating to getting at the wire harness. So one of the things that's going to be important to do, or make it easier, your life a lot easier, is to go ahead and cut the wires. You don't need the old wires, and it just makes it a lot easier to move things around to get at all the clips and everything that you need to do. So we cut the wires, and that made things work a lot easier in terms of getting at things. Now, you're not going to use this tool, but it's a great pointer. So the O2 sensor sits right about there, and it's tilted a little away from where the screwdriver is. And so you can kind of get at it from this side a little bit after you take the tire off and the interior wheel well. And you're going to also have to work underneath. So you're going to have to go back and forth, because some of this stuff works well from this side, some of it works well from underneath. And it took both of us, Dave and I, quite a bit of effort to get it loose. You can see from the, oops, you can see from the damage done on this, you know, from the way it's bent and how the hex head is all mushed over, that it took quite a bit of effort to get this out of there. Some of these can be a real bugger and very, very difficult to get out, depending upon how crudded up they are from not working properly. We also sprayed a lot of penetrating oil on there and let it soak for a while, but finally the thing that made the difference was we heated up the exhaust pipe. Now, if you heat it up properly, the pipe will expand, loosening the grip on the threads. But if you get this hot, then you're just expanding both of them, and it's not doing you any good. So clearly, what you want to do is get your torch and heat on this side a little bit away from the sensor, and it doesn't take too long. You need to heat it for 20-30 seconds, maybe a little bit longer than that, and then let the heat dissipate and form around the pipe, and that'll expand the pipe. So after you get through heating it, give it a couple of minutes to equalize the heat around, and then you can get this off. And that's what we finally had to do to get this to finally come off, no matter how hard we tried. The other thing that made a real difference for us in getting this off was this is the tool we are normally using, which is a great tool for dealing with most O2 sensors. But these upstream O2 sensors on bank 1 are always a real nightmare to get to in any car that I've ever worked on. And so we finally found this guy, which is just really nice for getting in there and being able to work without having to have a separate extension and ratchet and all that makes it so you can't quite get the torque on there that you would like. So we'll put the link to this down in the description below. But that's what it finally took to get this all pulled apart. Now, of course, when you put this back in, you can't clip the wires or anything like that, and you're going to have to mostly work from underneath. You might be able to get a better start on it from up here under the wheel well in terms of starting it. So when you put this in, it's going to go in at about an angle like this. And from underneath or on top, you've got to be sure that the wires go down underneath. Then you want to be sure that as you twist this into the exhaust manifold that you're turning the wires at the same time. You don't want the wires to be twisting and getting all bunched up and twisted around and all messed up, you know, because you're not turning them at the same rate. Because you want to be careful about, you know, what happens down in this area while you're putting that together, because that's going to be bent pretty hard once you're up into the exhaust area for where this thing fits. So this is the new O2 sensor that we bought. It's OEM equivalent. And one of the things it has on here is this clip for some vehicles. Our particular vehicle doesn't use this. As you noticed from our earlier part in our video, when we were disconnecting this, that it was actually put on with a zip tie. And these just get in the way of trying to twist these around to try and work on that zip tie. So you really don't need it. And so my recommendation is if you have this car, just take a screwdriver and pop it off just like that. And then it'll make your life a whole lot easier as you twist this and turn this around, trying to get it seated into the connector. Now before we reassemble this, be aware that all these connectors have internal O-rings inside the part that slides over. And that's there because it's trying to keep out all the road debris and all the moisture and everything to keep from deteriorating the connectors. However, I like to spray them down a little bit. I'll spray the one underneath the truck just before I put this back in, but just take a little bit of, and what it is it's QD electronic cleaner, which is made for these fittings. The other thing is you want to be sure that you have a very, very slight amount of silicone grease on the outside to help grease that O-ring or that seal area. So you just take just a little bit, put it on there, kind of wipe it. That'll make it assemble a lot easier. That'll grease the O-ring and allow that to slide together. And then more importantly, when it's time to take it apart, you'll know that it'll come apart a lot easier. And that'll help seal up, you know, and make sure that that O-ring is working properly and keeping the dust and dirt and water out of your connector. So when you put this back in, one of the other things you want to keep in mind is that it's a real good idea to put a little anti-seize on here. Now, this came from the parts house with the anti-seize on it. I'm not sure what anti-seize it is. I like to use the nickel anti-seize. It's a much higher temperature and has a better life to it. But you'll also notice it has a crush washer here. So when you put this back on, you want to be sure that you give it a good extra oomph when you put it in to be sure you crush that washer, and that's what makes your final seal on your exhaust pipe. And you certainly don't want to have any little tiny leakages on your exhaust pipe. So those are some guidelines for you to kind of help you out in putting this thing back together again. So we're going to go ahead and put it all together again, and then we'll get back at you after that. Okay. So I'm twisting the wire down here while you're doing that up there.
Okay. Right. There it goes. Okay. All right, so we're trying to get the connectors back together again. You can see there's not a whole lot of room to work. And so we're just trying to remember there's a directionality to it, that this little clip has to match up with the hook clip up here on top. So we got the we're putting this together. You can see how it's starting to slide together. We need to push it so that it latches completely, and then after we get it all latched, it just slides up underneath those two silver harnesses right there, and kind of is held into place by those silver harnesses. You can put a zip tie on them if you like. We're not going to do that at this point. I don't see the real need for it because it'll hold in place just fine. And then we'll just tuck the wire back up underneath all of this stuff so that it kind of holds all of it in place. So that'll kind of wrap up getting our O2 sensor installed.
When you get ready to do your spark plugs, you want to just take a second and use some kind of a air nozzle to just kind of get all the gunk out of the way, because you really don't want anything falling down into the cylinders. Now, typically it won't be anything but light dust or something, but it's always good to give it a good blow off and blow it off real well, just to make sure that there's nothing going to drop down in the cylinders. So we're going to go ahead and do that now, and then we'll start taking out the number 2 cylinder here and replacing that spark plug. So we're going to turn off the camera so we don't get any dust on the camera, and get this blown off and get ready to go. First thing we need to do is we need to remove the electrical clip right here. And so the first thing is you've got to pop this red tab down, because that locks the piece in. And it should pop down with just your finger or your fingernail. Okay, so we've now got it locked down. Then you can push down on this gray piece right there and start wiggling it off. If it doesn't come off easy, you might take something like a little larger screwdriver, just real gently. You don't want to break anything. Just start, again, push down on that gray clip. And if you have a tough time getting to it, like I'm having right now, then you can use a little screwdriver to get just down on the very end. So you want to be on the very, very end. You're going to have to get out of the way a little bit there, Dave. Then you can start working it off. Oh, there it goes. I heard it click, and now it slides off. All right, so that takes care of getting the electrical clip off. The next thing we need to do is take this 8mm bolt off, and this is like all the things on the associated with the spark plugs, that's really, really long threads. All right, so now the coil assembly, you can just start working that out, and that comes right out. So that's your coil assembly. We're going to go ahead and replace this. Apparently whoever put it on last kind of jammed it in there, and you notice that they've kind of crunched up the seal surfaces right there. So that's one thing to be cautious about when you put that back in. We'll show you a little bit more about how to take care of that when we assemble this. Your tendency may be to want to put kind of impact wrench or something on there to drive these things out in the end to keep from having to turn so much. But I really discourage that. It's a good way to break off a spark plug in the hole, and then you've got a real problem. All right, and here comes the spark plug out. And this one isn't too bad. It's carboned up a fair amount, but you can see that the end of the iridium tip has been worn down a fair amount. It's got a bigger gap than it should have. So we're going to go ahead and replace that. So when I put spark plugs in, I like using nickel anti-seize. It's probably one of the better ones in the copper or the plain anti-seize. It's a much higher temperature one. Now, the manufacturer as well as the dealer will tell you that they've got special coatings on the end of the spark plug, so you don't need anti-seize. I found that to be not quite as reliable as putting anti-seize on there. It makes it a whole lot easier to get in. I like the nickel because it helps improve the electrical conductivity, which you need. However, you've got to be careful using it. So when you put it on, you want to be up at the very top part of the threads and just get a little bit on in a few spots. Then go ahead and run that around with your finger and go ahead and work it down a little bit. But you want to be real careful that you don't get any on the very tip. So, you know, as we're getting down there, and so we're going to be good with that. That'll help make that come out a lot easier and will give us the conductivity that we need. So let's just drop that spark plug back in there. All right. Shoot. All right, my little attachment is giving me grief here. There we go. Okay. So you want to get it down to where it's finger tight, and then you want to give it, it's on a taper, so you don't want to give it, overdo it. It's not like you're trying to hit a crush washer. So you want to go ahead and give it just a good, maybe an eighth of a turn, maybe a quarter of a turn, somewhere in that area, just so it's really snug in there. All right, we get ready to put the coil back on. There's a couple of things we want to do. One is we want to make sure we have good electrical conductivity. So I like to use this QD electronic cleaner, which is made for automobiles. And it kind of cleans and leaves a bit of a coating on the electrical contacts. And so I like doing that. So just spray a little bit in there, shake out the excess, then go down here and on the plug, go ahead and squirt that down. Now that'll also help lubricate the O-ring that's in there so it goes together better. Now the other thing we want to do is, as far as the O-ring, because they have an O-ring that goes around on the inside and the outside to keep the dust and dirt out of the electrical connectors. So the other thing we want to do is, we can't really get to the inside very well, but we can put just a dab of high viscosity grease, silicone grease, only silicone grease. Just put that a little bit around the outside. That'll help lubricate that outside O-ring and will help it seal. I also like to put just a little bit on the, end. Don't really go up in there, but just a little bit on the end, and it kind of smushes down around where it needs to go. All right, with that little prep, go ahead and put the new coil back in. We're replacing the coil, by the way, not using the old. Oh, wait a minute. Before I do that, one more thing. Remember we talked about how they munged up this seal here, and I almost forgot, but we also put just a little bit of grease around this seal here and this outer seal here, and that just makes all the assembly go so much nicer. And it doesn't take too much, just a little bit to go around each of those surfaces, and then they slide together so much nicer. And you don't get that crunch up that we had on that other one. So we just go ahead and slide that back in, kind of wiggle it till it gets down, line up the screw hole, drop our bolt back in. Got to kind of get a dry fingers here. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and tighten that on up. Come on. Stretchy bugger. Now, again, remember you're dealing with plastic parts, so you don't need to get too rigorous on it, but just give it a good little twist there. And then slide your connector back on that you've already prepped. Make sure it clicks. So we finished replacing the spark plugs and buckled up the engine, put all the pieces back in place. You saw how we took them off, so it's just doing the reverse to put them all back together again. So just in a kind of a quick summary, we tossed a P219A code. Now, do not confuse that with an O219 code. They're two different codes. So it's a P219A. And that is an air-fuel mixture issue on bank 1, which is the passenger side bank. And there's a variety of things that could be being caused by. So typically it's one of three things, as we discussed a little earlier. It could be the fuel injectors themselves, it could be the spark plugs, it could be the O2 sensors. Typically when any of the first two occur, it takes out the O2 sensor, so it's always a safe bet to replace the O2 sensor. As you can see from our video, it's a real difficult operation to try and get that O2 sensor out. It might take some special tools and a lot of patience, but if you just stick with it, you can certainly get it done. It's not something that requires any special knowledge or anything, just persistence to work through the issues to get that replaced and put back all the wiring and put back in place in the right way. Then we went and decided to go ahead and replace the spark plugs. That gets 2 out of the 3 taken care of. So we've cleared the codes. So we're going to drive the car for a while and see if it tosses the code again. If it does, then that means we'll need to do the fuel injectors, and we'll make a video of that. If you don't see a part 2 come up on the item, you know, where we are replacing the fuel injectors, then hey, we got it done with the 2 replacements that, you know, are the most common. The P219A is a frequent problem with the Expedition, with the 215 Expedition, but it's common on all of the Expeditions, so it's something that you might be running into. All right, so hopefully that kind of gives you one quick overview of what we did, and you can look at the video. Please note all the little refinements that we put in there as to things that will help make your life a little easier as you work on your car. But it's all very doable. You can really save yourself a lot of money, even though the parts are expensive in and of themselves, but the labor rate paying somebody else to do this can be pretty high. So thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you viewing our channel. Be sure you hit the thumbs up and to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. We'll put a list of the tools and the parts in the description below, and we'd appreciate it if you'd buy through our links. That really helps us out a lot. So thank you very much and have a good day.